Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending this evening. My name is Jen Pauliukonis. I am the Director of Policy and Programming at the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. The recent tragic spate of shootings across the nation, including the horrific shootings in Boulder and Colorado Springs, have once again highlighted the horrific public health crisis. A crisis, unfortunately, that some of our speakers tonight are all too familiar with. Our hearts go out to all of the victims' loved ones and survivors who are suffering unspeakable loss. We extend our deepest sympathy to everyone who is grieving and to all those in Colorado impacted by gun violence. In addition to the shootings that make headlines, there are scores more impacted by community gun violence, domestic gun violence, and gun suicide. No one is immune to gun violence or its trauma. And recent shootings demonstrate the gaps that still exist in current legislation. We clearly need to do more to keep Colorado citizens safe. For those of you who are not familiar with the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence or affiliate, the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence, we're an organization that uses the public health and equity lens to identify and implement evidence-based policy solutions and programs to reduce gun violence in all its forms. We've been making communities safer since 1974 by translating research into policy and engaging with community stakeholders to advocate and implement gun violence prevention solutions. Our years of research have shown us that collaborating with partners in states across the country is truly the path to ending our national epidemic of gun violence and making America safer state by state. This is why we created our new Safer States Initiative, a program that partners with organizations like Colorado Ceasefire, working directly with them to advocate for better gun laws and helping to make Colorado a safer state. Colorado Ceasefire, represented here tonight by Tom Mauser, is the longest serving statewide grassroots gun violence prevention organization in the state. They're advocating for and helping to secure passage of vital new gun violence prevention legislation in Colorado. We're partnering with them to help seize this moment to pass overdue common sense measures in the Colorado General Assembly that will save lives. Colorado's unfortunate historic struggle with mass shootings and the state's GVP advocates' detailed understanding of the issues place the state in a position to make significant progress right now. The Colorado legislature has taken bold action, presenting 6 new gun violence prevention bills just this session. We at the Coalition are expanding our efforts in Colorado by supporting and partnering with Colorado Ceasefire through our Safer States Initiative to help pass this legislation at this crucial time. We understand the important role that advances in gun violence prevention at the state level play in furthering the movement overall. And before we start, I want to take a moment to invite all of our guests and attendees to submit questions for a Q&A session that we'll have later during this conversation through the Q&A submission box located at the bottom of your screen. We're honored tonight to have 3 special guests this evening who are strong Colorado violence prevention advocates. And unfortunately, Representative Jennifer Bacon is actually presenting one of her bills right now on the floor, and she'll be late, and we're hoping that she'll be able to join us shortly. We're excited to discuss the details of a path forward with our guests and how this moment right now can be leveraged to affect real and lasting change. And it's my pleasure to introduce and welcome Representative Tom Sullivan. Representative Sullivan represents Colorado House District 37 in the Centennial area. He is a U.S. Air Force veteran, retired postal worker, and lifelong union member who began a career in politics after his 27-year-old son, Alex, was murdered in the 2012 Aurora movie theater shooting. He is committed to advancing gun safety policy and addressing the gun violence crisis plaguing both Colorado and the entire country. Also joining us today is Colorado Ceasefire spokesperson and board member, Tom Mauser. Tom Mauser is the father of Daniel Mauser, one of the students killed at Columbine High School. Tom became a gun violence prevention advocate following that tragedy. He took a 1-year leave of absence from his job to work as a lobbyist in the Colorado legislature to fight for stronger gun laws. Tom serves as a board member of the Colorado Ceasefire and is its spokesperson. He is the author of Walking in Daniel's Shoes, an account of his experiences following the Columbine tragedy. The book title comes from the fact that he literally wears his son's shoes, the ones he wore that fateful day, whenever he speaks publicly. I'm hoping that Representative Bacon will be able to join us at some point during this conversation. But since we always are going to be able to roll with the punches during conversations in the legislative session, and we're really, really grateful for the work that she's doing right now on the floor. So thank you, both of our Toms, Tom Mauser and Representative Sullivan, for being here today. And I'm sure I speak for our entire audience when I state how deeply saddened we are by the tragic loss that the both of you have experienced. And might each of you take a moment to share why you chose to become active in the movement in the wake of your personal loss, and why the advocacy for better gun violence prevention policies is essential. And we can start with Representative Sullivan, and then Tom, if you can follow with how you got involved in advocacy as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jen, and good evening, everybody, and thanks for tuning in to this important conversation. I'm always humbled to come and speak about this. Yeah, when Alex was murdered on his birthday, on his 27th birthday, we were really caught off guard. We had we still were going to have a trial. We had all of that trauma and everything to deal with. I remember that when we had the first year anniversary, there was a bus tour that came by. I think it was called maybe a No More, bus tour. And I spoke at that, talked about what it had meant to me. People heard what I said, started inviting me to show up at other places. So I would do that. I would, it was like, that was the next progression. In 2013, we had a bunch of gun violence prevention bills that were brought forward at the state legislature. I sat at home and watched and listened to that. And then it was, I went down there and got myself in line to testify and followed along and all of that kind of stuff. When our trial finally got over, and it had been about 3.5 years afterwards, I could see that there was actually more to do, but that I thought that the place to do it was from the inside. So that's when I began to run for office. I ran for a Senate seat. The district here that I live in has always been a red district. It's my wife and I, we've lived here for 29 years. A Democrat has never won a seat here before. There were times when Democrats wouldn't even run for the seat. But with our story and all the hard work that we put into it, we lost the first race, but we got a lot of people. The other side was very concerned. They had spent a lot of money to defeat us, and others saw that this was something that was possible. So 2 years later, we ran for a House seat, and we were able to win that seat. One of the big issues that I ran on was that should I get elected, first thing I would do is run an extreme risk protection order bill, not knowing if anybody was going to let me do it, if they were going to include me in on anything. And when I got elected, that's exactly what we did. And we became the 12th state in the country to pass an extreme risk protection order. That took a lot of the energy out of the building, actually got me recalled the next off year. They came after me for doing exactly what I said that I would do. And but we were also then the first state legislator to defeat a recall because of the support from people like those who are here today listening in, and the rest of the people of Colorado. We beat that recall. The second year we were looking to put some more legislation through, but because of COVID, it all got put back. But I stayed in front. I stay in front of our leadership. I stay in front of our caucus. They can't look away. They can't take a breath after we have a panelist come down to testify on whenever the Republicans would try to repeal the common sense things that we did. We only get 3 minutes to talk. Now I just stand there in front of them and continue to talk about what needs to be done. And so some legislation got put through at the very beginning of session. We were already getting some of that passed, and then we had the Boulder shooting, and I had already, had other things ready. We were talking about it. We got another group of people within the caucus who were energized, and we brought 3 more bills up. Just the other day on Friday, one of them passed thirds in the House, 2 of them passed seconds. They've now passed thirds in the House. They're on their way over to Senate. So yeah, this is going to be the most transformative state legislature in the country when it comes to gun violence prevention, because this legislative session, we will pass 6 gun violence prevention bills.
That is an incredible journey. I'm inspired already. Tom Mauser, I'm wondering if you could talk about, I know Representative Sullivan, his path toward advocacy has been through becoming a lawmaker, and you've chosen a different path. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your journey. Oh.
Thanks, Jen. I first got involved in the gun violence prevention issue as an advocate just 10 days after Columbine. The first 10 days, I was quiet, didn't speak to the media. And then I heard there was going to be a protest against the NRA, which was having its national convention in Denver 10 days after Columbine. And I decided I have to be there. I went to the protest. I didn't intend to speak or really do anything other than pass out some thoughts that I had. When I found out that there were no other Columbine parents there, they asked me to speak. And I decided, despite being in grief and really being somewhat of an introvert, I felt like I had to speak. If nobody else from the Columbine would speak, I would. And I could do that for Daniel. And that really launched me. And people, especially opponents, often say, well, your son was killed with a gun, so you become anti-gun. No, really, my advocacy was because of a question that came from my son Daniel. Just 10 days after, just 2 weeks before Columbine, he asked me a question out of the blue. Dad, did you know there were loopholes in the Brady bill? And that I didn't know how to answer that. I just said no. Then 2 weeks later, he was killed with a gun that was purchased through a loophole in the Brady bill. That's what really got me started, what motivated me. Then as I became active, as soon as I spoke out that day, then all of a sudden the media attention, I found myself going, meeting other people who were advocates, and that motivated me more. And the more that I learned about how weak our gun laws are, that motivated me even more. And really what's kept it up for me over the years, and what's motivated me the most, is just listening to my opponents and listening to the lack of logic in the things that they're arguing, some of the ridiculous things that they argue. And that's kept me involved over the years.
Wow, that's incredibly, incredibly powerful. While we're often brought together because of mass shootings. Representative Bacon. So I just want to let our attendees know that we are also being joined this evening by Colorado Representative Jennifer Bacon. Representative Bacon represents Colorado House District 7 in Denver's far northeast. As an educator, school administrator, lawyer, and community organizer, Representative Bacon has committed her career to advancing opportunities through education. As vice president of the Denver School Board of Education, she's especially motivated to address the rise in youth gun violence she's witnessing in her district. She lives out her belief that the best decisions are those made by those who are most impacted. And Representative Bacon, you have really great time, and we're actually just starting to talk about a first question about how you got involved in advocacy. You're really becoming a gun violence prevention champion in the state of Colorado, and what has motivated you toward that role?
Thank you, and hi everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. Just jumped out of Judiciary Committee, but I don't know if you saw my mask. My mask actually says education above all and Denver Public Schools. And so most of my work in this began as a school board member, which wasn't that long ago, but I represent Northeast Denver. And the winter right before the pandemic, so 2019, our community suffered from upwards of 9 gun deaths of our youth. And while a lot of people were talking about different things like, how can we talk about a tutoring program or whatnot, some people were just talking about some smaller things. I'm like, we have to prioritize this. And I run schools. So it was just like, I don't know what that actually meant, but the thought of the life lost of young people, and young people are entirely future tense, was just devastating. And so I really just wanted to be able to support, you're going to hear from Rep. Sullivan, who has such a deep understanding of this in so many different ways and levels. But one of the things that he always says is, why Colorado? And usually the spotlight on Colorado is around some of our mass shootings, unfortunately. But we also know that this type of violence plagues communities in a different way, but in just as a harmful one. And I really wanted to be able to provide a face to that, to our kids of color, to our young men, to our young women, so that we wouldn't lose anymore. One of the students who died that winter was a former student of mine. And so we just wanted to do what I could to keep the spotlight on multiple areas because this issue impacts us all so deeply.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. That's really, really powerful and profound. And we're also just really grateful for you being here. I know it's not easy to do in the middle of I assume, one of the busiest legislative sessions that we've had in recent history. And Representative Bacon, if I'm not mistaken, this is your freshman year within the legislature. So congratulations as well. And as you said, gun violence affects families and communities every single day in Colorado. Firearm suicide actually accounts for 76% of all of the gun deaths in Colorado. Nearly 900 Coloradan lives were taken by a gun in 2019, and 74 of those killed were young people. And for everyone who's listening, I just want you to think that that's about the capacity of a school bus. So I want you to imagine that if each year in Colorado, an entire school bus full of young people died, but then our leaders did nothing about it. In addition to that, like many public health issues, there are drastic racial disparities. So in Colorado, young Black males between the ages of 15 and 34 have a firearm homicide rate over 12 times higher than white males of the same age group. And I'm just so grateful that we have such brave leaders here and in the General Assembly committed to changing these statistics and saving these lives, because there are real people behind these numbers, of course. And because no one law is going to fix everything, a comprehensive solution to address gun violence is necessary. And there are a variety of gun violence bills that have been introduced in the package so far this session. And I'm going to review a couple of those very, very briefly, and then we're actually going to dig into the bill that's actually sponsored by both of our representatives here this evening, which is the creation of an Office of Gun Violence Prevention. But of those 6 bills, 2 have already been passed and signed by the governor, which is requirement of safe storage, the reporting of lost and stolen firearms to prevent guns from being diverted to the underground market, DV firearm removal law, so strengthening our firearm removal process for domestic abusers. That has just passed the House. Strengthening of background checks, including closing the Charleston loophole, which ensures that a gun will not be sold until a background check has been completed. That also just passed the House. I feel like just the last couple of days, we've hit a bunch of these milestones, which is really exciting. And of course, the creation of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, which we're going to delve into a little bit more deeply in a little bit, has also recently passed the House, I think just yesterday. And today, a Senate bill repealing preemption, which will allow local municipalities to pass their own gun safety measures, has passed the Senate today, and each of these are going to move to the opposite chamber. And so this has been quite a year, along with the public health crisis of gun violence, which has been only increasing over the last year. We have a confluence of other public health issues with police violence, police gun violence, and the COVID pandemic. And Representative Bacon, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how the confluence of public health issues has exacerbated this and how it's affecting some of the bills that we're seeing during this session.
And how the pandemic has exacerbated some of the bills that we've seen this session.
Mm-hmm.
And is this within the realm of gun violence, or you want me to give you the whole? I got a lot of answers to that.
Well, for time's sake, let's stick to gun violence.
Okay. So the one thing I'll say, and this is loosely connected, is the pandemic has really forced a lot of our systems to become efficient. And so what we've seen is that, some of the old arguments of, oh, we can't do it or it costs too much, kind of out of the window now. And so just as a side note, we've particularly taken to that in the criminal justice space. But also what I think the pandemic has really done, I think when I talk to folks about why this is a public health crisis and also what we can do about it, we have the pandemic to lean on by way of examples, right? So one of the things that I said in the well was, how long are we supposed to wash our hands? Everybody know that, right? Like 20 seconds. How many feet are we supposed to, stand apart from folks? And the reason why we know those things is because we have seen what a public health reaction looks like in our communities. And so we needed to name that gun violence is a public health crisis because of its effects, the anxiety, the PTSD, right? The grief. Those are the things that take on physical manifestations in our body. But we need to talk about it as a specific thing that is occurring in our communities. So now we know what information campaigns look like, right? And, they were trying to be denigrated by calling advertisements. We're not selling anything. But, what does an ad look like that says it's 10 o'clock, is your gun locked, right? Or if there's a sign that says, do you feel alone? Call Safe to Tell. And so I think for us, in being able to see kind of like the rollout of how do we jump on this pandemic, I hope people can really connect the dots that we can do the same in talking about gun violence. And so I'm actually really looking forward to that. And that's part of the reason why I was excited to be able to co-sponsor, because these conversations are not happening en masse and broadly in our communities. And now we know we can talk about things this way. So I think that's a really specific example.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And Representative Sullivan, I'm going to ask you just to take a moment to talk about kind of the current climate right now in the legislature. And then Tom Mauser, we're going to follow up and we're going to start, diving into some specifics about HB 1299 and the creation of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. But Representative Sullivan, what is the climate right now? What's the feel in the legislature as these bills are moving forward?
Well, we've got a bunch of people who are supportive of the issues that we've done. I mean, as one of the things I said when we brought out this last batch of gun violence prevention bills was we used to have these conversations in church basements and in library meeting rooms and all of that kind of stuff. Now these conversations are being had on the floor of the state Senate and the state House. That wasn't happening in 2014 and 2015. And so now we've brought that conversation to that point. And we have champions who are standing up and talking about things. I mean, when we were having the debate, and the debate is so different between the committee and the House floor work. Because when we have the committees, we actually have people who have been impacted by gun violence, and they come and they tell their stories. And those are impactful stories that, people, can hear and we can take actions against them. Once we get to the floor, we're getting the same tired NRA talking points that they have been pushing for the last 15 years. And it's just actually disrespectful to the people of the state of Colorado. I mean, the first thing they wanted to do with the Office of Gun Violence is they wanted to define the word gun and then define the word violence. I mean, that's where they started on the conversation. And the point is, Colorado is the fourth highest state for mass shootings in the country. We have the #1 county in the United States for suicides by gun. We have 2 of the top 20 counties in the United States for suicides by gun. Yet, all during this time, we have still allowed them. We had a record-setting gun transfers last year of over 500,000 gun transfers. Well, that record is going to be shattered this year, and yet they want to talk about we're on some kind of agenda to take firearms from them. There couldn't be anything further from the truth. And then they look at a gun violence prevention office, and they're talking about some group that is doing this. No, it's an office within the Department of Public Health, a department that they have direct links to, that they all know, and that they have to come in front of the state legislature and talk about what they are doing. Yet they talk about, oh, we're on some kind of an agenda, and that this is some group of people who are doing nothing but taking away Second Amendment rights from people. Couldn't be further from the truth.
Thank you. And I think, as we're talking about that bill, I think that's a great segue. Tom Mauser, I wonder if you can, provide some of our attendees a few of the details about the comprehensive nature of this bill, which Representative Sullivan and Representative Bacon have introduced.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I think this is a really, really big step for Colorado. I think we're leading the way in creation of this Office of Gun Violence Prevention. And I think it's great that it would be located in our State Department of Health, making clear that this is a public health issue. This gun violence epidemic needs to be addressed at our public health department. This office would do a number of things. It would elevate the issue in the eyes of the public. It would disseminate information to the public that we need to know. I would hope that it would also address and come up with the numbers of injuries. That's one thing that's not tracked very well, is gunshot injuries. It could administer grant programs, be a resource bank. It could collaborate with researchers to find out what would be the best kind of GVP tools and programs for Colorado based on the experience in other states. And I think especially it's important that it would conduct public awareness campaigns. So often we hear people from the other side saying, well, these gun laws won't work. They're just not going to work. Well, it is a bit more difficult for some laws to work if indeed the public isn't aware of them. I think this is especially true of the Safe Storage bill and the Extreme Risk Protection Order bill, ERPO, that we do need to educate the public about that. And I spent most of my career working for CDOT, the Colorado Department of Transportation. And at CDOT, there is a highway safety office working to reduce and prevent traffic deaths. And they have about 10 employees doing that. Well, before the pandemic, we were losing about just over 600 people in traffic accidents. But in 2019, we lost over 800 people to gunshots. And there's no office addressing gun safety and gun violence prevention. I don't think it's at all unreasonable to have an office that does that for Colorado, given those numbers of deaths.
That's a really, really great analogy and a great point. And, as you said, there's, not only does it establish the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, but the bill will appropriate funds for community violence intervention and prevention programs that aim to interrupt cycles of interpersonal violence, and also public awareness of extreme risk laws that Representative Sullivan mentioned earlier, which are a known tool to prevent firearm suicide. And so I'm hoping that both Representative Bacon and Representative Sullivan can talk a little bit about the impact specifically that the funding would allow for both extreme risk laws and also the violence intervention and prevention funding. And so Representative Bacon, if you want to kind of take first crack at that, and Representative Sullivan, if you could follow that up.
Sure, I'll talk a little bit about the interruption work. So I was really proud in committee, the first panel that we had. We heard from practitioners in our communities. Ray Washington, he talked about the work that he does with young men. And some of the things that I heard from the young people after we went through our struggles in the winter were that our young people were very clear with us on a lot of things. They told us where they're getting guns from, right? Traded on the internet, out of cars, from houses, right? From their homes. But they also said, we're doing this because we are hungry, we have no place to go, and we have no one to talk to. And that first panel really just shed the light on that our young kids are still kids, but it matters that they are able to see a future, right? See beyond their hands, and do they have someone to help them process what they're experiencing? In a lot of ways, they said, we just need someone to listen. And so a big portion of this work, like the interruption pieces, are having community-driven initiatives to help reach their communities where they're at, to address the issues that they know their communities are experiencing. And so a lot of the things you see in even like the Giffords language or ceasefire is that things like even having a community park is a violence interrupter. That means there are places where kids can go and play instead of, right, engaging in this kind of violence. But the grants that we have are to be able to support programs like that, to be able to support anything from mentoring to, like the parks that are rooted in evidence and can also show evidence that it worked, so that we can source all that information up into a resource bank and then be able to further target across the state. So I think that, without having this source of dollars and a specific intention on mitigating this violence this way, we won't see the changes, because the people who do these programs are saying, I'm paying for this out of my pocket. And the difference between, $5,000 with someone giving it to you in a few meals versus trying to figure out how to support yourself and other people goes a long way. So we're really excited about that work on the interruption side.
Thank you so much. And Representative Sullivan, I'm wondering if you talk about the importance of the appropriations for extreme risk protection orders in Colorado and the type of impact that you see that would have.
Oh, absolutely. After the Boulder shooting, where apparently this individual was having mental breakdowns, was known to be having these problems, and was a concern by his family, but his family apparently didn't know or weren't able to access filing an extreme risk protection order. It was kind of curious a couple of days afterward that law enforcement came out and had a press conference talking about, if you see something, you should say something, and you should do something if there's somebody in your, sphere, in your space around you who was having these kinds of problems, and you were supposed to let somebody know. And they touted out a couple of tip lines that people should be calling. And quite frankly, tip lines are great, but tip lines, we know, are the numbers that people call into, and that's how black men and brown men are murdered, because they're jogging in the wrong neighborhood. Okay, that's what happens with tip lines. An extreme risk protection order that allows, in this case, in Colorado, law enforcement or immediate family members to report to law enforcement that something should be happening. Law enforcement in this state prevented us from expanding that to like mental health professionals, teachers, principals, your college roommate, who you sit down with and talk to for hours on end. And they're the ones who know that you're in a struggling time. They wouldn't allow us to add those kinds of people to an extreme risk protection order. Now that I saw that press conference, I'm very interested to get back with law enforcement and say, hey, maybe we might want to rethink who we can put on that list, who can report an extreme risk protection order, because as we saw, it wasn't getting done up there in Boulder. And so that's something that we have to promote and let people know this is an avenue that you can take. And again, let the other the jurisdictions out there know. We see that some jurisdictions do know how to handle an extreme risk protection order. That's one of the first or second things that they do when they're in those situations. Some of the other municipalities, that's much further down the list, and they're not filing that when somebody else is.
Yeah, and thank you to the both of you so much for these words. I think it just really brings up the point that it's not enough to just pass gun laws, but we need to pass evidence-informed gun laws. They need to be implemented equitably and justly, and the gun violence prevention programs and laws need to be funded appropriately so that they can actually reach their true potential. So we can reach the young people who are affected by gun violence, affected by the trauma of gun violence, and ensure that they don't follow the same path, that they have other options. And of course, not only do we want to get these laws through the legislature this session and have them be implemented, but we want to make sure that we aren't back here in a few years after another tragedy. I think all of us want to have a strong grassroots advocacy base on the ground that will continue to meaningfully strengthen the laws that we have and ensure that they are being implemented effectively and equitably over the years. And so, Tom Mauser, as I've stated to everyone here tonight, and as you of course know, Colorado Ceasefire is one of our partners within the Safer States Initiative. And just to remind everyone on the call, our program provides financial, policy, and technical assistance to the organization and to state and community level GVP organizations across the country. It's imperative that authentic grassroots organizations on the ground are supported so that they're able to do this work and to do it sustainably long term. So Tom, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what Colorado Ceasefire is doing on the ground to enact and implement the gun laws that Colorado is working to pass. And of course, how Colorado Ceasefire has struggled over the years, being under-resourced like many, state and community level organizations, and maybe talk a little about how the Safer States Initiative is helping.
Sure. I think it's important for people to know that for most of the years that Ceasefire has been around, for over 20 years now, most of those years, we've had a paid professional lobbyist down at the Capitol and had to scrape, and get donations from people to pay that lobbyist. And it's important to have somebody down there. Legislators have to deal with a lot of different issues and a lot of different bills, and it's helpful. They need to get information. They need help in some cases with the language of a bill. We need help in getting people down there to testify. So lobbyist plays an important role for us because we are an all-volunteer organization. We don't have paid staff. We pay a lobbyist but as a contractor, and that's it. And we assist the lobbyists as we're able. And I think it's important to know that we have a strong coalition. So we have other organizations that are supportive with us on these laws. We get together with them monthly. That plays an important role. And it really helps when we have a national organization that's assisting us also, as in this initiative. And I have to mention that it was back in 2016 that the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence came to Colorado and had a forum where we talked about the need for an extreme risk protection order law. We brought people together, law enforcement, social services, mental health, and really began a conversation about that issue, which eventually led to the creation of our ARPO law in Colorado. So we really appreciate that assistance. We appreciate it in a case like this where we have so many bills coming up. it's helpful to know what's happening in other states. So it's really great to have the assistance of a national organization that can reflect on what's happening and what's been successful in other states. You know, I was the board president probably about 15 years ago or so of Ceasefire. We weren't paying a real lot of money for a lobbyist, and frankly, we weren't introducing much. We were mostly fighting bad gun bills, not introducing things. That's changed over the past 15 years an awful lot. Based on how many bills are being presented, that's how you base what your fee is going to be to your lobbyists. So we've seen a large increase over the years because now Colorado is becoming so much more proactive.
Thank you. And of course, having strong advocates is important as we, are working the rest of this session to get these bills passed. And I'm wondering, Representative Bacon, if you could talk a little bit about what are the biggest challenges or hurdles that you're seeing right now in passing this package and getting it through the legislature this spring?
Well, I would say that one, I think our caucus and the Democrats have particularly committed to getting this done. And, suffice to say, we have the numbers. I'll just give a few examples. Myself and a few other freshman legislators, from Boulder, have really just been able to kind of pull ourselves together and say to our colleagues, let us help. We can take some of this load and shoulder some of the work, because that's how important these things have just become. The urgency, I represent Northeast Denver, our Boulderites just experienced their tragedy, and people rallied around that. I mean, they were like, you don't have to do it, right? We'll all get behind that. And so that's actually very important right now. It's really important for us to understand the position that we are in to be able to talk about our agenda, because it's not one we've been in for a long time. And while we have the ability to do things, we need to do things that are important. I think the interesting thing has just, I think what Representative Sullivan talked about earlier in working with our Republican colleagues, like it seems like they've kind of buckled down perhaps as the number of Democrats has just grown. It seems like people are really affixed to talking points because I do, like candidly, Representative Sullivan saw this too. I think maybe we might have had one or two Republicans who really wanted to support this, but they stuck to party line. And that's really disappointing, But I think what we're going to do is just utilize our strength and our strength in our communities. This is something that everyone is tired of. And, you can hear from Representative Sullivan, this is not a partisan issue, The people are tired of it. And so with the community support and the support we have in the House, we can really get some things done. And before session is over, which is really important.
Absolutely.
As well.
Yeah. So I'm going to open and just after one more question, open it up to some questions we have from some of our attendees here this evening. And before we do that, I just, Tom Mauser, I would like for you to just go through a few just really concrete actions that our guests on the call this evening can take in the coming weeks before session is over to become involved and help make sure that all of these bills make it across the finish line.
Sure. First of all, I'd say, please join Colorado Ceasefire. Find us online, coloradoceasefire.org. Join us. We're not a membership dues organization. We don't plaster you with all kinds of emails. We inform you what's going on. We encourage you to write those letters to the editor, make those calls, write those letters to legislators to let them know what's important to you. What I think is important is, we sometimes hear politicians say, I don't really follow the polls. Well, I think there's a little bit of that's true. I think they're not going to follow the polls so much if there's not something behind it, if they're not hearing from people. They need to hear from people. So if you're, for example, in a Republican, if you're represented by Republican legislators, if you simply say, well, I know they're not going to vote my way, so I don't bother contacting them. Unfortunately, that fits into their narrative that I don't hear anything from people in my district about these gun issues. Well, if you're in a Democratic district, you're represented by Democratic legislators. Don't just say, well, I think they're going to vote my way anyhow. Why would I contact them? You need to be thanking them for the ones that have passed and encourage them to continue that good job. you need to thank them and you need to encourage them. Why? Imagine yourself as a legislator. Well, I've got a whole lot of competing priorities. If I'm not hearing from people about these issues, my priorities might change. So it's really important to let them know what's important to you and that this issue continues to be important to you.
Absolutely. Really, really great tips. I appreciate that. And now, we're going to get to some of these really great questions from our guests this evening. And the first one, I'm going to ask Representative Sullivan if you can answer this, which is really some logistics. When does the legislature adjourn this spring? And do you think that all of the bills in the package are going to make it through adjournment? And to both of our representatives, we have a strong shout out and hurrah for all of the progress that's been made so far.
Yeah, we've got, as of this point, for the entire 120-day session, we have 26 days left. That puts it to be about something like the 12th or 14th of June. That would be the Sine Die day. That is the day when the 120 days are finished. We've got a lot of big things that are happening. They were initially looking at the 28th of January of May, so just before Memorial Day, but we are going to take the 3 days of the Memorial Day weekend. We will be back after that for at least another week finishing things up. And yes, I am confident that the 4 bills, the domestic violence one, the office, the expanded background check, and I keep wanting to say emoluments. It's not emoluments, but the other, the fourth bill.
Preemption.
The preemption bill, yeah. The preemption bill just is moving itself through the Senate. I see it coming over to the House pretty soon, and it's I think we're going to get that favorably put through. So yeah, I think we're going to get all 6 bills taken care of.
It really is turning into a historic session. I mean, it's amazing to be a part of. Another question actually relates to the support from our presidential administration. I think that we're really lucky right now that we have an executive in the White House who is really tackling gun violence prevention, I think, in the most comprehensive way that we've seen. And how much influence do you feel that recent leadership and the current executive orders that have been issued by the White House will have right now on the status of the bills in Colorado? Anyone's open to taking that.
Well, I'll speak to that. Yes, it's great. Joe Biden has been aware of the gun violence problem in the United States. I mean, certainly he was there with President Obama after the Sandy Hook massacre, which President Obama said was the darkest day of the 8 years that he was there. He wasn't able really to do much more other than bring the message up. We weren't able to pass a simple background check nationwide, but these mass shootings and the day-to-day death toll that have been going on in the United States has continued to creep up, and we've got somebody who is aware of it. That's why I'm gratified by our Office of Gun Violence Prevention, and I hope that that will spur somebody in Washington, D.C. to start one as well, because we do need a federal presence to help us in all of the things we do state by state.
Yeah, I absolutely. And something else that I think is really interesting you brought up with the connection with the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. As a part of those executive orders, President Biden has committed about $5 billion to violence and intervention programs. And I think that the Office of Gun Violence Prevention is a really great opportunity for the state of Colorado to be able to take advantage and allocate those funds to the programs and municipalities that are already here on the ground. So I think that bill that we've been discussing here this evening really are going to highlight and complement some of those executive orders on the federal level. So another question, as we are, coming up, we have about 9 minutes left. I just want to let everyone know I will be incredibly considerate of all of your time here this evening, and I'm so thankful for you. Representative Bacon, we've talked a lot about, comprehensive bills that are going to affect all aspects of gun violence. And as we're closing out, the session on, 6 policies that, could potentially, pass this session, as we're all, hopeful here tonight. What other opportunities are there in Colorado to make our state more peaceful, especially if we're talking about the youth and impacted communities?
Thank you. I think that's a great question. We have been talking a lot about mental health supports too as a legislature. We know that the state has an issue in suicide. We are, unfortunately on the map in the country for that. I do think this is the time for us to also look at a lot of our systems that have been disproportionately impacting communities of color for their trauma, for their lack of access to resources, and for any kind of impacts. I just brought a bill as a side note to look at traumatic brain injury. So if we're going to talk about why people are turning to guns and why people are ending up incarcerated, we need to undo some of these structures that create those circumstances. So this is the time again to look into how do we create mental health supports, conversations, where do we integrate those conversations, whether they are in schools or in our jails and prisons? How do we talk about investing in our communities? There's a reason why we see some of these numbers coming out of communities that are under-resourced. I'll go again, like communities that don't have spaces for kids to play, right? Or other opportunities for young people because we're not investing in them, results in what we're seeing. So I would encourage folks to look at some of those root cause issues, become the advocates around mental health and behavioral health, talk about how our young people don't have access to resources and how we can better invest in them so that we don't see these disproportionate outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's important to address root causes of violence, but also understand that it's cyclical. So as root causes are exacerbating gun violence, the gun violence and illegal guns on our streets, that's exacerbating a lot of these other public health issues as well. And so it's important that we're addressing all of these meaningfully at the same time so we can really look at the communities most affected holistically to bring about real change, which has been great. So we are coming up on time. And again, as I told our panelists and all our attendees, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, especially I know Representative Bacon is still on the floor at the legislature. And so I do want to give one final discussion in terms of how everyone here can help. Tom Mauser has spoken of concrete actions to get involved, signing up for Colorado Ceasefire, calling lawmakers, emailing lawmakers, showing up to show your support of these bills, writing letters to the editor. And when you sign up for Colorado Ceasefire, they can help coordinate all of that advocacy for you and help educate you on all of the bills within the package of 6 bills that are moving through the legislature in an amazing pace right now. But also I want to let everyone know on the call that we are happy to announce that the Safer States Initiative actually has received a $50,000 matching gift challenge from an anonymous donor who's deeply committed to expanding gun violence prevention in Colorado. And we hope that those who are interested and able in investing in a safer future for Colorado will consider making a gift to unlock this future funding. We'll be following up in this call, and we're going to be sharing information about how you can participate in all of these actions with Colorado Ceasefire to get engaged in this legislative session. We need to make sure that none of these bills, find a stumbling block or a hurdle as we get through these last few weeks of session. And also enable to help us unlock the additional investment so that we can help make Colorado a safer state for many years to come. So I just want to thank everyone so much for joining us this evening. And just in our last couple minutes, I just want to give all of our participants and our presenters this evening just 30 seconds each to just give one final comment as we're leaving today. And Tom Mauser, I wonder if we can start with you, Representative Bacon, and then Representative Sullivan.
I think I will just share with you words from a man I had a lot of respect for, Ken Gordon, who's a former state representative and senator, who said that public policy is made by people who show up. And I encourage everybody to show up, because you need to be heard. And if you show up, you can have a big influence on things.
Wise words. Representative Bacon?
Yeah, on behalf of my community, who's just so disproportionately represented in all of these areas of negativity, I'd like to remind people that, we are born the same. We are not badder people. It is these systems that creates these outcomes. And so these systems are man-made, which means they can be unmade. And so we need everyone to lean into our humanity and support each other and get to work in recognizing the world that we have created, and then get to work on the world that we actually want to see. After being here for my first year in the legislature and passing these bills, I know it's possible. And I hope that is a demonstration to all of you that we can change the world. So thank you for your support of all of this work.
Perfectly said. And Representative Sullivan, you get our last word this evening.
Yeah, I would just let everybody know that we're not going anywhere. We're gonna stay here and continue doing what needs to be done, and that we are making progress even in the darkest times. After Boulder, after the Colorado Springs domestic violence massacre down there, it looks like we're not doing enough, but we are doing things. We're going to pass 6 bills this year. Those are life-saving bills. These are life-saving actions that are happening, and we are saving lives of people that we don't even know, and they don't know that they're being saved by this, but that's what happened. And the only way that continues to happen is that we stand up, we speak up, and we keep moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to all of our guests this evening for joining us. And as we say good night, we'll also say, let's get to work. So thank you all so much.